The Protestant Reformation was a seismic upheaval that reshaped the Western world. It sparked a maelstrom of religious, social, and cultural transformations that still reverberate today. As we embark on this journey through the tumultuous 16th century, the question echoes, what happens when faith and power collide? As the 16th century unfolded, the tremors of discontent with the Catholic Church's authority continued to intensify, fueled by the likes of Martin Luther, whose 95 Theses had ignited a firestorm of debate and protest in 1517. The German theologian's bold challenge to the Church's doctrine on indulgences had struck a chord with many who felt that the papacy had overstepped its bounds, amassing wealth and power at the expense of spiritual integrity. Luther's defiance had not gone unnoticed, and by 1520 he had been summoned to appear before the Diet of Worms, a gathering of imperial dignitaries and ecclesiastical leaders, to recant his views or face the consequences. His famous declaration, "Here the first stand, I can do no other," would become a rallying cry for the burgeoning Protestant movement, which was rapidly gaining momentum across Europe. The Diet's verdict, predictably, was one of condemnation, and Luther was subsequently excommunicated by Pope Leo X. Yet, far from silencing him, this only served to galvanize his resolve and broaden his appeal as he continued to disseminate his ideas through a series of influential writings, including his German translation of the Bible. Meanwhile, in Switzerland, another key figure was emerging to play a pivotal role in the Reformation, Huldrych Zwingli, a charismatic pastor from Zurich. Zwingli's own spiritual journey had led him to reject many of the traditional Catholic practices and doctrines, and by 1522 he had begun to introduce reforms in his parish, including the abolition of celibacy for clergy and the use of vernacular languages in worship. His message resonated with many in Switzerland, and soon Zwingli's movement would spread throughout the region, laying the groundwork for what would eventually become the Reformed tradition. As the Protestant movement gained traction, it began to attract attention from secular leaders who saw in it an opportunity to challenge the dominance of the Holy Roman Empire and assert their own authority. One such leader was Frederick III, Elector of Saxony, who had been instrumental in protecting Luther from imperial reprisal. By 1526, Frederick had formally allied himself with the Protestant cause, providing crucial support for the fledgling movement. This symbiotic relationship between Protestantism and state power would become a hallmark of the Reformation, as princes and monarchs increasingly sought to harness the energy of the movement to further their own interests. The Anabaptists, for example, with their radical emphasis on adult baptism and communal living, would push the boundaries of Protestantism in ways that both fascinated and unnerved their contemporaries. Meanwhile, the likes of John Calvin, a French theologian who would soon rise to prominence in Geneva, were laying the foundations for a more systematic and structured approach to Protestant theology, one that would eventually give birth to a distinct Reformed tradition. As the Reformation continued to unfold, John Calvin's influence began to make itself felt in Geneva, a city that would become a bastion of Protestantism. Calvin, who had fled France to escape persecution, arrived in Geneva in 1536 and soon became embroiled in the city's tumultuous religious politics. His systematic approach to theology, as outlined in his seminal work, The Institutes of the Christian Religion, resonated with many in Geneva, who were seeking a more structured and coherent expression of Protestant doctrine. Calvin's vision for a purified church, one that was governed by a Presbyterian system of elders and deacons rather than a hierarchical clergy, began to take shape in Geneva as he worked tirelessly to implement his reforms. One of the key challenges facing Calvin was the opposition from the city's existing power structures, including the Catholic Church and the secular authorities. However, he found an ally in Guillaume Fichet, the rector of the University of Geneva, who shared his passion for reform. Together, they worked to establish a new system of education, one that would emphasize biblical studies and prepare students for leadership roles in the Protestant Church. The Academy of Geneva, which was founded in 1559, would become a hub for Protestant scholarship and a training ground for future leaders of the Reformation. Meanwhile, in England, the Reformation was taking a decidedly different turn. Henry VIII, who had initially opposed Luther's ideas, began to see the potential benefits of breaking with Rome, particularly when it came to securing an annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. The English monarch's desire for a male heir, combined with his growing disillusionment with the papacy, led him to establish the Church of England with himself as its head. The Act of Supremacy, passed in 1534, declared the king to be the supreme governor of the Church, marking a significant shift in the balance of power between the monarchy and the clergy. As the English Reformation gained momentum, figures like Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and Thomas Cromwell, Henry's chief advisor, played crucial roles in shaping the new church. Cranmer, who had been influenced by Lutheran ideas during his time in Germany, worked to introduce Protestant reforms into the Church of England, including the use of vernacular languages in worship and the abolition of certain Catholic practices. Cromwell, meanwhile, used his considerable political influence to push through the dissolution of the monasteries, a move that would have far-reaching consequences for the English Church and society. As the English Reformation continued to take shape, the dissolution of the monasteries, led by Thomas Cromwell, resulted in a massive transfer of wealth and property from the Catholic Church to the English crown. This process, which began in 1536, saw the closure of over 800 monasteries, nunneries, and friaries, with their assets being seized by the state. The proceeds from these sales were used to fund Henry VIII's military campaigns, as well as to reward his loyal supporters, including Cromwell himself. One notable example of this process was the dissolution of the monastery at Glastonbury, a wealthy and influential Benedictine abbey in Somerset. The abbey's assets, which included extensive lands, properties, and treasures, were seized by the crown, and its abbot, Richard Whiting, was executed on charges of treason. This event marked a significant turning point in the English Reformation, as it demonstrated the willingness of the Tudor state to suppress Catholic institutions and seize their assets. Meanwhile, in Geneva, John Calvin's influence continued to grow, as he worked tirelessly to establish a purified church governed by a Presbyterian system of elders and deacons. His systematic approach to theology, as outlined in his Institutes of the Christian Religion, resonated with many in Geneva who were seeking a more structured and coherent expression of Protestant doctrine. Calvin's vision for a disciplined and orderly church, where believers were expected to live according to strict moral standards, began to take shape in Geneva as he worked to implement his reforms. One key aspect of Calvin's reform program was the establishment of a rigorous system of education which would prepare students for leadership roles in the Protestant Church. The Academy of Geneva, founded in 1559, became a hub for Protestant scholarship, attracting students from across Europe who were seeking to study under Calvin and other prominent Reformed theologians. The Academy's curriculum, which emphasized biblical studies, theology, and classical languages, helped to shape a new generation of Protestant leaders who would go on to play key roles in the spread of Reformed Christianity across Europe. The young king, who was only 9 years old when he came to the throne, was a committed Protestant, and his reign would see a significant acceleration of the reform process in England. With the support of powerful advisors, including Thomas Cranmer and the Duke of Somerset, Edward VI would oversee the introduction of major reforms, including the use of the Book of Common Prayer, which would become a cornerstone of Anglican worship. The publication of the Book of Common Prayer in 1549 marked a significant milestone in the English Reformation, as it provided a standardized liturgy for churches across the country. The book's author, Thomas Cranmer, had been influenced by Lutheran and Calvinist ideas during his time in Germany, and he incorporated many of these elements into the prayer book's services and rituals. The result was a distinctive form of worship that blended elements of Catholic tradition with Protestant theology, creating a unique and enduring expression of Anglican identity. The seismic shifts in theological thought, the bravery of reformers, and the subsequent divisions that emerged have all contributed to the rich tapestry of modern society. The Reformation's impact can be seen in the diverse Christian traditions that exist today, the evolution of political systems, and the enduring quest for individual freedom and intellectual inquiry. And so, as we close this chapter in our historical exploration, we carry with us the knowledge that the Protestant Reformation's legacy continues to shape our world, inspiring us to question, to seek, and to strive for a deeper understanding of ourselves and our place within the grand narrative of human history. Thank you for joining me throughout this historical journey. That's all for today's History with Herodotus. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, And until next time, remember that, to understand the present, we must first understand the past.